rural Colorado is completely left out. And not only that, there's no diversity of thought. And that came from Jared Polis, because it says in statute there can only be two of the three commissioners can come from the same party. So you have two Democrats and a progressive left unaffiliated. Imagine if it were one oil and gas and one coal, and then me as the unaffiliated. Rightly, people would scream about a lack of diversity of thought. Right now, there is no diversity of thought on that commission.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy here in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And to kick things off for us this week on today's episode, we're going to do a little bit of an update on, a quite large topic on this show, and that's obviously the impending closure, the forced closure of Colorado's coal units, its entire coal fleet. Obviously, we've talked about how by 2031, the state envisions being completely coal-free in order to meet state carbon goals. But it doesn't all happen by 2031. This is a staggered, it's at least according to settlement agreements and things decided at the PUC, it's sort of set out to be a bit of a staggered transition where coal units here and there get shut down. It just so happens that 2025, this year, is a pretty big year when it comes to coal plant closures. And I think it's important for us to update folks that at the very least, 3 units are scheduled to be shut down by the end of 2025, and there may even be one other unit that, for all intents and purposes, might as well be shut down for a little bit. Isn't that right, Amy?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough year because, well, one is, and we've talked about this, Comanche 2 is scheduled to be shut down 12/31, New Year's Eve, essentially, of this year. And that is, I'm just pulling up, that's 396 megawatts of coal. Okay, well, okay, so we can probably figure that out. But also closing will be, and we also already have closed Comanche 1. So now you're closing Comanche 2. Martin Drake is now closed, and then you're also shutting down Craig Unit 1. And then the Pawnee Station, which is out in Brush, which is, I think that's about 500 megawatts. Mm-hmm. That is going to be converted to natural gas. And everyone that we've talked to, I should say, I reached out to Xcel and said, hey, is this on schedule? And what it is, it's supposed to be closed it's supposed to no longer be operating, burning coal on New Year's Eve of this year, so 12/31/2025, and then it reopens on January 1st as a natural gas plant. So by what my sources are telling me and others are saying, Xcel is saying it is on target to open on January 1st as a natural gas-fired power plant. We'll see. But I do want to also point out right now, here's the big one, Jake. So in the midst of all of this, we have all of this shutting down, but we also have Comanche Unit 3, which has been offline since, it looks like August roughly, but they're saying it could be offline until July or end of June 2026. So this is a lengthy maintenance issue, operational issue. And it's interesting about this. You hear this all the time. Oh my God, Comanche 3 is such a problem child. It's never really worked right. It hasn't lived up to its expectations. Yes and no. It has lived up to the expectations of the Sierra Club and others who forced the settlement agreement, which said that you can't run Comanche 3 all the time because you have to meet emissions reduction target. That was part of this settlement agreement, which also included hundreds of millions of dollars in ratepayer money to make Comanche 2 cleaner so that you could keep it open until 2025. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars to make Comanche to the most environmentally friendly unit really in the country at that time. And then, now we're closing it. So those are sunk costs. We're not going to get those back. And then part of that settlement agreement would be Comanche 3 is closing now in 2030, decades ahead of the end of its useful life cycle. And of course, we're saying, well, it should be closed because it's so expensive to operate. Let's talk a little bit about why. I was talking with an engineer who knows a little bit about this stuff because the guy does a lot with coal. The way it was, the agreement with Comanche was that they wouldn't run it the way you run a baseload power plant, which is that a coal plant's not meant, it's not it's not like a natural gas peaker plant where it can go on and off and on and off. You've actually designed something to do specifically that. Comanche was designed to be a workhorse, a draft horse. You can't turn it into a thoroughbred and expect it to perform the way it was supposed to as a draft horse. They are running Comanche 3 like it's a thoroughbred, like it only has, it's a quick shot out of the gate. You only use it at certain times. So yeah, its efficiency or its capacity factor is actually lower because they're using it in an inefficient way. And what does that do? Well, it's hard on the coal plant and it causes this shuttering effect, which damages or certainly it diminishes the extent of its life cycle. So they're having to shut it down and do some maintenance on it. And they're doing it. And let's remind everyone, Comanche's what, 850 megawatts of power, 857 megawatts. And it's going to be shut down at the same time that Comanche 2, well, it's shut down now. We're not using, but at the same time that Comanche 2 is coming offline, and the same time that Craig Unit 1 is offline. So now what we have is, well, just with Comanche, 1.3 megawatts or gigawatts of coal that will not be available through next June. Maybe it comes on sooner, but let's hope we get it back before the peak of summer air conditioning. Because if we don't have that, that's a significant percentage of Excel's portfolio to be offline. And again, we've talked about this. You can't just throw up a bunch of wind and solar and say, oh, look, we put up a bunch of wind and solar, so we can power our grid. It's not like that. The more wind and solar you put on the grid, the more unreliable power you put on the grid does not make the grid reliable. So if we can't get this fixed before next summer, it could be a hot summer.
Yeah, I think that is certainly the risk. To your point about some of the problems we've seen with the Comanche plant. Yes, it's had its issues, basic maintenance wise, but using a coal plant as a ramping resource is by no means anyone's ideal use of a baseload power plant. That's just not how they're meant to operate. Like you said, I like your thoroughbred draft horse analogy. Ideally, you want to see a relatively flat line of generation out of those types of resources, and then you let your wind come in when the wind's blowing. You let your peakers fire up when peak demand requires it. That's how you have an efficient and affordable system from your reliable power plants. But so not only is that putting stress on the parts, you actually have in this Colorado Sun article I found that's sort of reporting on Comanche being shut down. You basically have Excel admitting out loud that, look, you guys are making us shut this thing down. We're just not investing that much in maintenance of something that why would we spend all these dollars on something that we're not going to recoup the cost of those maintenance dollars by over the lifetime of, typically be able to cover it by making up for it with electricity sales, right? So it flattens out the expense of maintaining a resource. But if you're requiring for the limited time that these units have left, them to not run all the time to meet emissions targets, and then 2, to require them to be shut down prematurely anyway, why as a private company would you pour millions and millions of dollars into your regularly scheduled maintenance to keep these things 100% running just fine. So again, people will throw all these accusations about, oh, Comanche's a lemon, but there are real policy things here deliberately reducing the reliability of what should be a reliable baseload unit. And to your point, reliable at a time when folks definitely want to have their electricity come through the socket when the temperatures are up.
Well, and I got to tell you, if these settlement agreements are, the devil's always in the details with them, right? So here's part of it too. If you're relying on the Sierra Club as your manager of your grid, chances are it's not going to end well. And that's exactly what this was done because of emissions reduction targets that were part of what the Sierra Club and Western Resource Advocates and some of the others wanted in these settlement agreements. And now you have a governor and a PUC and a legislature and an energy office that are more than willing to go along with it. You know what? When you put non-engineers in charge of things that only engineers should be in charge of, it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well for our reliability of our grid. It's not going to end well for ratepayers. I mean, so I did a quick search, like what's coming up? What could possibly replace this? I've got a question for you. One of the things that popped up, how about this one? The power pathways. Think that'll be finished in 2026 to help out? I'm guessing no, based on what we know. And then there's a 140 megawatt solar farm in Western Colorado. Tri-State owns that. But listen, it's not like what shows up. Oh yeah, we've got these huge projects coming online that are going to make up for it. We don't have any of that.
Yeah, certainly not anything close to the over a gigawatt worth of baseload dispatchable power that's going to be non-existent in just a matter of months here. So, obviously we've heard and we've covered on the show here Xcel's rush to kind of do what they call the near-term procurement, which is basically turbocharging their resource acquisition process to try to get a bunch of wind and solar on the grid in order to capture the subsidies before they phase out. But listeners shouldn't fool themselves. Those will not be on and in service in time to make a difference in this current supply crunch either. At most, what Xcel is shooting for is to have construction begin on those projects sometime next year. That doesn't do anything for the grid in the immediate term once those 1.5 or so gigawatts of coal no longer exist on the grid. So like you said, it could get hot. You certainly hope that we get some favorable weather or something, or our natural gas fleet and the existing wind and solar perform admirably. Otherwise, I think Xcel is going to be relying on a whole lot of imports from other states to help shore things up.
They're going to hope. But what they will do is ensure, if they can, is to build those so that they are insured to get the subsidies. Yeah. Make sure that you get enough construction going so that you have the subsidies. But, probably not enough to meet peak demand in the summer. I'll tell you what, we saw a couple of those messages from Xcel, and I'm sure other utilities do it. It's just that we are Xcel customers, so that's what you and I see.
Yep.
And that's what most of the staff around here around here sees and come to us and say, have you seen this message? Turn your air conditioner up to 85 and there will be pain. My prediction is there will be pain this summer.
Yeah,
because of these premature retirements, and the people who are managing the grid are not actually. When I say managing, I mean they exert control over it, over resource generation. It's not the utilities. It is the environmental NGOs that have their foot on the neck of Colorado. And they're just not engineers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the folks that manage the grid and where those environmental NGOs thrive, one of the other stories we wanted to cover today was the release of the PUC Sunset Report. I think we may have teased this in a previous episode because I was actually one of the people that participated in this process. It's something that many regulatory agencies here in the state of Colorado undergo under state law. Every so often, the Department of Regulatory Affairs will do some research on the performance of that XYZ regulatory agency and field interviews with stakeholders to see how things can be improved. Is it continuing to serve its original purpose? Is it serving the people of Colorado as an effective regulator, et cetera, et cetera? And so, like I said, I was one of the people to participate back in the summer, did an interview with an analyst over at Dora and shared my thoughts about all the things that, it won't be a surprise to listeners here who hear us gripe about the PUC all the time, but I shared some of my thoughts about how the agency could be improved in terms of transparency and participation and representation of different groups that don't often get intervener status, or even someone on the commission who represents them, whether that be because they're in rural Colorado or they frankly just don't live in the Boulder, Pitkin County locales. Also shared thoughts on, what I think are outdated laws that govern the PUC, sort of like the renewable portfolio standards, which, Colorado has exceeded already, and they only really serve to create regulatory, cluster for utilities doing reports. Shared all of that. And, I didn't hold my breath as to whether or not my opinion would carry the day, but I had high hopes at least to see some of that reflected in the report. Lo and behold, the report's out, and let's just say it didn't have a whole lot of Jake reflected in the PUC sunset report.
Or my suspicions are a whole lot of Pueblo County,
Yeah.
whole lot of utility. I mean, my guess is, well, and I shouldn't say my guess is, this is stuff that makes some of the environmental NGOs that we just mentioned very happy, because let's just go through a couple of them. And when I say the environmental NGOs, by the way, that also means at least one sitting commissioner. Chairman Eric Blank was the president, CEO, executive director of Western Resource Advocates, an environmental NGO that is very active at PUC proceedings. They're in all of them related to energy. And one of the things you mentioned is, can we lower the bar, that bar or barrier for entry? And that actually came out of our case statement. We did a case study of our experience intervening at the Public Utilities Commission, and it's on the website, and we'll also drop it in, but we'll drop it in the show notes. And the extraordinarily high bar that you must meet to be an active participant in any proceeding. What they'll say, well, you can submit public comments, and they do make a recommendation that you should take public comments into consideration. Most of those public comments are usually, we need more emissions reduction and more wind and solar. But occasionally there are folks like us that, we weighed in, and the utilities cited us saying, yeah, we agree with them. They were right on their observations about the clean heat plan. But it is an exceedingly high bar to entry, and they didn't lower that. Here's another one. They should actually show up to work occasionally. Show up. You've got that building. You've got an entire office. Show up to work occasionally. And they do occasionally, but all of their meetings are on Zoom. They are deciding multi-billion-dollar rate cases without being in person. They just sit on Zoom and do it. Of course, it's not going to affect any of them. Commissioner Gilman lives in Eagle County, and she's a solar developer. Tom Plant is an activist. He used to run the Colorado Energy Office. And then Eric Blank lives in, and I should say Tom Plant lives in Boulder, represented Boulder at the General Assembly as a Democrat. And Chairman Blank lives in Boulder. And so you have Boulder, Eagle County. I mean, it does. And so the other one, no change in representation. There is no change in representation. Rural Colorado is completely left out. And not only that, there's no diversity of thought. And that came from Jared Polis, because it says in statute, there can only be 2 of the 3 commissioners can come from the same party. So you have 2 Democrats and a progressive left unaffiliated.
Right.
I just think about this on the PUC. Imagine if it were two oil and gas representatives, people had worked in the oil and gas industry, or better yet, one oil and gas and one coal. And then me as the unaffiliated. That would be fantastic from my perspective. But imagine the rightly, people would scream about a lack of diversity of thought.
Right.
And right now, there is no diversity of thought on that commission, except for the Clean Heat Plan, where Gilman and Plant didn't think that the settlement agreement with Black Hills actually went far enough. Chair Eric Blank was a yes on that settlement agreement, which is what is being reheard right now. The exact same settlement agreement has been presented, and you have the same one that Commissioner Gilman and Commissioner Plant both rejected before. So the only diversity of thought is in that Clean Heat Plan, but otherwise they are a rubber stamp. They are nothing more than a rubber stamp for this forced march to insanity.
Yeah. No, I tried to make all of those recommendations, and like you said, didn't seem to really want to upset that status quo. But one thing that they are willing to upset in terms of the status quo is evidently one of the recommendations. I don't know who this came from, but they're recommending that, and just take a step back really quick. These sunset reports, by the way, are not necessarily valid law. They present this to the legislature, and then lawmakers during the upcoming session will then craft a bill, the sunset renewal bill, where they can decide which one of these recommendations that they want to incorporate, and then basically renew the PUC going forward. But that being said, one of the recommendations is a theme that we've seen the lawmakers down there already take, and they want to exempt the commissioners from Colorado's open meetings law requirement, basically to allow the commissioners out of the public view to discuss open cases that they're deciding, which is something, we've at the Independence Institute have hammered the state assembly for doing, because 2 years ago, lawmakers exempted themselves from the open meeting. They gave themselves the special privilege of not having to be transparent. And evidently the PUC is jealous of that and wants to get in on some of that privacy action too. Like we always say at the Independence Institute, privacy is for the people, transparency is for government. To your point, if you're going to be up there deciding multi-billion-dollar rate cases that affect something that captive ratepayers have to finance and controls a resource that is the matter of life and death for the people of Colorado, the least you could do is do it out of the shadows in front of public view so that folks can try their best in this opaque environment to figure out what's going on. But that one I was sort of dumbfounded when I saw that. No, we don't need to do rework any of the PUC's programs to help save ratepayers money, but what we ought to do is make sure that they don't have to abide by the open meetings laws that local governments have to abide by. Just pretty staggering stuff to see. Amy, I don't know if you have any other takeaways or any last minute things you want to talk about this. Otherwise, I'll kick it to you for takeaways.
Actually, I do want to bring up one more, and you're the one who pointed this one out. When is the next sunset review on the energy side of the PUC?
That's right. So, see if I can find that chart again, but
I can tell you it's 2037.
Yep, I have it right here. They want to split it by, which is odd. They haven't done this in past sunset proceedings for the PUC. They want to split when sunset is done based on jurisdiction or based on industry that the PUC regulates, because they do more than electricity down there. They're telecom, rail, and all that. This recommendation says that we should do the sunset in 2030 for transportation and rail, 2033 for water and telecom, 2035 for pipeline safety, but not until 2037. So 12 years, a dozen years from now, we'll revisit this subject on something that, like we just said, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar rate cases, a complete overhaul of the way that the state has traditionally generated energy. You'd think you'd want some, frequent scrutiny of how we're, going down this road when we're doing something completely unprecedented in human history, which is in a short span of time overhauling the way we generate and consume electricity. But no, we just the stated reason is there's a lot of things, it's very complicated, a lot of things going on. Lawmakers are tinkering a lot. We should just let them do that, and then once the dust has settled, then we'll go back and revisit whether it was prudent. So that you're right to bring that up. That's pretty staggering.
So let's wrap our minds around that little nugget for just a moment. So we have the Clean Heat Plan coming up, which is, we predict between now and 2040. I mean, you're looking at $300 billion roughly You have this forced march to renewables, another, electrify the grid with total electrification with wind and solar, another 350 billion. And then, of course, electrification of transportation, whole thing all in, let's 700 billion. That doesn't account for inflation, so you do what you want with that. We don't know where that's going to be. And they don't want a review of it. Wrap your mind around that. Almost $1 trillion, and they don't want they don't want the public to have some sort, to have an opportunity to weigh in on the job that they're doing. This quasi-judicial, unrepresentative, opaque agency will not have anyone over, looking into or scrutinizing its actions on one of the most expensive policy forced march in the history of Colorado. That's what came out of the report.
Yeah, pretty insane to see. That one definitely caught me by surprise. We'll have to see, once lawmakers get their hands on this. I have to imagine some of the folks that are like-minded down there that happen to be in the majority may let that slide. But if so, we will, of course, be covering that here on PowerGab, because that would be a big change of pace, and I think a big slap in the face to ratepayers that are justifiably concerned about what that would mean for their utility bills and the reliability of their electricity. But do you have any takeaways for our listeners on this or the previous story about coal closures?
Oh, you bet I do. One, it may be a very hot summer. Just make sure it's going to be a hot summer. Look for the notices. Look for the notices that say you've got to turn up your thermostat. Don't turn it down because it's hot outside. You got to turn it up if you're going to have your air conditioner on at all. Or if you are one of those meters where they come in and they can actually adjust it for you, watch out for that. Two, I'm going to rename the Sunset Review Report. I'm going to call it the Let's Make Coloradans Hate the PUC Even More Report. And then three, firm your own grid, get a generator, do something, or start investing in fans too, because it could be a hot summer.
Good advice as always, but that does it for us on another episode here. Folks like what they saw, they can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio-only shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcast. And if listeners want to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests they'd like to see us interview here on the show, they can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.